In the Matrix, Morpheus, a serious man wearing tiny clip-on nose glasses, sits a worried Neo down. He tells Neo that he is a slave, which doesn't make Neo any less worried. In fact, Neo's job, his memories, his very sense of self are just a projection designed to keep him docile. This scene pokes at a vulnerable spot in the human psyche, that nagging sensation that something about human life doesn't quite fit. We spend our lives chasing happiness, yet we're wired to be chronically dissatisfied. We crave peace, yet we argue with strangers online over grammar. We want to be moral, yet we will eat the last cookie and blame the dog. Is there a splinter in our mind driving us mad? Maybe. What if I told you that the operating system running your life was designed by an architect who didn't care about you? When you look in the mirror, what you see isn't actually a person, at least from the perspective of deep time. You are a vehicle, a giant lumbering robot made of flesh and bones designed for one purpose: to carry small molecules called genes safely through the battlefield of your life and let them copy themselves before you fall apart and die. We find that the powerful machines that control us are not the giant tentacled robots of the Matrix, but tiny strands of DNA. Now, why on earth am I talking about this in a podcast about innovation? Well, every change or adaptation in a gene is an invention of nature, and the rules that govern the spread of these inventions apply to our own inventions and, of course, the ideas and technologies that will decide what humanity becomes next. Welcome to How to Change the World, where we learn about the history and future of innovation by reviewing every impactful human invention ever in chronological order. I am your host, Samuel Webster Harris, taking you on this podcast journey through 3 million years of human history. Along the way, we also look at timeless lessons like in the episode today, where we will be starting with DNA, how life forms change, and consequently how ideas themselves come alive, develop minds of their own, and go on to change the world. What starts with germline, game theory, and zombie rats will explain warmongering politicians, religion spanning continents, and even French driving. Finally, with all these mental models built, we will follow them into the future. So, truly a feast for the curious innovator who wants to know how the world works. And with that, if you are not subscribed, hit that button to join the journey, and let's get going. We like to believe that we are the authors of our own lives. We wake up, we choose our coffee, we choose our partner. We feel like the captains of a small but sturdy ship. But let's say you have a few too many glasses of wine. Suddenly you start laughing at jokes that aren't very funny. You become attracted to people and activities that can only be defined as a very bad idea. It's all a humbling reminder of how thin the layer of you really is, and how much of your behavior is actually just chemistry. So let's consider the drive behind our behaviors. In 1930s, the ethologist and Nobel Prize winner-to-be, Nico Tinbergen, was studying the three-spined stickleback fish and its emotions. One fine day, a male fish in his tank went crazy. It was smashing itself against the glass, but there were no other fish even in the room. As it happened, Tinbergen looked out to see what was going on, and he did notice a bright red Royal Mail postal van driving past. From the fish's point of view, it didn't see a van as much as it saw just a red dot. And Tinbergen wondered if it had a simple emotional shortcut. So he dangled a crude lump of wax with a red dot on it into the tank, and the fish went berserk and attacked it. But here's the funny part. Amongst his other experiments, he tried dangling a lump of silver wax shaped like a swollen belly. The same fish immediately stopped fighting and instead began zigzagging an exotic courtship dance. It really didn't matter that it was just a piece of wax. This little fish was going to shake it like his life depended on it. So we concluded that a red dot meant all-out war and a silver blob meant sexy time. I do wonder what it felt like to be that fish. Did he feel like he chose to attack the van? Did he feel like he fell in love with that piece of wax? Or Was he just a passenger in his own body watching his fins flare and his hips shake? It is easy to laugh at that fish. Stupid fish, we might say, flirting with a candle, attacking red dots. One big whacksident ready to happen. But in a way, we are the fish. And I'm more than just explaining the porn industry here, or why leaders of nations fight for power like toddlers fight over chocolate. Although both very strong theories. More widely, we really do just have basic buttons. I walk past a bakery, smell some fresh cinnamon buns, and my mouth and mind start watering. If I walk too close to a cliff, there is an incredible compulsion to slow down and tread very carefully. We are actually full of hardwired responses. After all, what is social media or advertising but systems designed to find the human versions of the red dots and silver blobs and utilize them to make you angry or horny so they can get you to buy and share things? Biology hard-coded the vulnerabilities into us, and our technologies find ways to exploit them. To quickly remind you how this biology business started, we must rewind 4 billion years. Enough time for the Grand Canyon to form 800 times from the river slowly carving its way into the rock. So, a very long time ago, we find the primordial soup, an ocean of warm chaotic broth of chemical sludge bubbling away. Atoms bumping into atoms, and by sheer dumb luck, a molecule formed that had a superpower. It could copy itself. This replicating molecule didn't have a brain or a plan. It just had a chemical stickiness that attracted building blocks and arranged them into a perfect mirror image of itself. And thus, the soup transformed into a factory. These replicators were fighting entropy, and they spread like wildfire, consuming the resources of the ocean until they were in competition with each other. Some built walls of protein around themselves, creating cells. Much later, they clustered together to form colonies, and those colonies got bigger, smarter, and faster. They even grew fins to swim, legs to run, and teeth to bite. The great arms race of history exploded. Arms themselves were completely optional. Just as optional were the thoughts you think. Minds were shaped for the specific needs of the organism as much as their other appendages were. So how and why do genes decide what to make us think? Well, just like algorithms use statistics to decide what to fill our feeds with, nature is a big game of statistics for what your genes will tell you to do. Take the honeybee. When a wasp attacks the hive, a worker bee will sting it, knowing that this act will rip away her insides and her future. A poet might call this heroic courage, whereas the gene calls it a cost-benefit calculation. Due to the weird way that bees reproduce, a worker bee shares 75% of her genes with her sisters, so more than her own children. If her death helps save just 2 of her sisters, her genes are coming out ahead on the balance sheet. Thus, a selfish gene inside her makes the compulsion to die in sacrifice stronger than the compulsion to survive, because the gene itself comes out with a profit. Now, before we let these clinical statistics rip the romance out of the meadows and the forests, ocean and skies, it is worth noting that selfish genes don't necessarily mean selfish beings. There is a reason flowers are beautiful and mothers are caring, just as there is a reason we have civilization and laws. Genes discovered something more powerful than competition: cooperation. In your lifetime, your cells will divide roughly 10 quadrillion times. Cancer is what happens when just one of those cell divisions becomes uncooperative. It is a 0.0000000000000000001% rebellion rate. And this statistical improbability kills 10 million people a year. What I like about these numbers is it makes us realize how dramatic the scale of our cooperation is that keeps us alive. Under a microscope, you are trillions of cells, more cells than there are stars in the Milky Way. Yet bafflingly, your cells work together like a rowing crew, all pulling in perfect rhythm. Now, getting 8 humans to row and sync is a minor miracle, yet every single heartbeat of your life, a few billion muscle cells contract perfectly in time to keep you alive. The genes inside you might be selfish agents with their own agenda, but they are trapped in the same boat, which usually keeps them cooperative. So why does cancer even arise? For a single cell, it's kind of like it wakes up with a midlife crisis and looks around at the other cells dutifully doing their jobs. Liver cells processing toxins, skin cells forming barriers, and it thinks to itself, why am I taking orders? I used to be a somebody. Back in the primordial soup, I was a champion replicator. So it defiantly stops rowing in rhythm, it replicates wildly, shoving other cells aside, convinced it's living its best life. Unregulated greed that forgets the bigger picture and burns the house down in the process on its quest for immortality. In the business world, you could think of a monopoly a bit like a form of cancer. The business just wants to grow as much as it can, but in the process it ends up stifling innovation by preventing fair competition. It tries to funnel all resources to itself whilst eliminating others. That's why we have rules against them in society, so that a healthy ecosystem of business can thrive just like a healthy body. These examples should make you wonder, is everything around us operating from a dark and selfish core? Why does kindness feel so real? Why do we help strangers or feel guilty when we let someone down? Part of the answer is that selfishness has limits. A virus that kills every host too fast wipes itself out. So evolution discovers a balance. Predators don't eat every last prey animal. This is why humans inherit nervous systems wired for both competition and care. We might well be good simply because our genes learned the consequences of being bad. If we consider early humans, immediate consequences might be your tribe exiling you or a neighbor clubbing you to death. But around 100,000 years ago, something mysterious started happening. People started burying the dead because they thought the dead were still watching them. And these dead people could get angry. Your moral compass no longer just feared the living. Your dead father who taught you to make a fur coat might come back and skin you alive for bad behavior. Then, 40,000 years ago, something else popped up. Sacred totems, the cave bear or the great mammoth, which created more spiritual consequences. If you betray another bear follower, the spirit would curse you. Your children could be born twisted, your spears will miss every shot, and a great sickness will befall you. So, when you meet a different tribe that also follows the bear spirit, they are no longer just an enemy, but a trading partner. Little belief systems like this started to spread across Ice Age Europe, binding scattered bands into vast networks of cooperation through fear of something bigger than just human revenge. Religion emerged as an answer to a problem. How do you trust strangers? And it did a very impressive job considering the circumstances. But to understand this at the next level, we need to see how genes and ideas can reach beyond the body. We live our lives with a strict definition of where we end. So I, for example, end at my fingertips and my toes. The air in front of me is not me. Our skin, it feels like a solid boundary. But in biology, boundaries are polite fictions. The spider's web is a geometric miracle. We know the spider built it, but how? The instructions for the web, with its angles and tension and sticky silk, are written in the spider's DNA. If you change the DNA, you change the shape of the web. So is the web a part of the spider? Of course not. It isn't made of cells, it isn't attached to the spider. But it is a physical manifestation of the spider's genetic code. It's a prosthetic limb made of silk, if you will. Richard Dawkins calls this the extended phenotype, the idea that a gene doesn't just shape the body it lives in, it shapes the world around it. A beaver dam is an example of a genetic object. The gene has reached out of the body, grabbed the forest, and reshaped the environment to suit itself. One might say it's damn impressive. Now, is this any different for those early humans that were compelled to build their religious ideas into the world? At Göbekli Tepe, they carved 50-ton stone pillars, each the weight of 7 elephants, and they arranged them in perfect circles somehow. The site was so sacred that nomadic tribes kept returning, staying longer each time, eventually building homes nearby in the first human settlements. The idea had reached out of the believers to shape the world, which in turn reshaped human behavior and civilization. So we don't end at our fingertips exactly. Our thoughts turn into tools, our minds create monuments, we leak out of ourselves into nature, as do all beings. If I walk through London with its 13,000 miles of roads, 4 million buildings and 270 underground stations, I can ask myself if we are anything more than ostentatious beavers. Now, genes don't just reach out into the environment, they can even reach into other organisms entirely. Did you know that over 30% of humans alive today carry a brain parasite that is mostly benign, but weirdly makes you almost 3 times more likely to die in a car crash and twice as likely to develop schizophrenia? In fact, over 50% of the citizens of Ethiopia, Brazil, Australia, and France have this parasite. Mais oui. It's called Toxoplasma gondii. You may have heard of it. It's a parasite of cats, but it spends part of its life in rats, where it's a little more catastrophic than it is in humans. It hacks the rat's brain so that when the rat smells some cat urine, it thinks to itself, woof, that is the sexiest thing I've ever smelled. I need to get closer to this cat. I need to take this cat to Paris. I need to... And then it gets eaten. The parasite rides the rat's corpse all the way into the cat's stomach like the world's grossest Uber. Of course, the rat thinks it's making a choice as freely as it makes any other choice. Quite frankly, it was positively excited about it. But the reality is it was just a vehicle. Now, this question of control makes you look at the world a little differently. And I'm not just talking about the insanity of French driving. No. But again, strong theory. What I want you to consider is control. When a virus makes you sneeze, it is more than a symptom. It is the virus using your diaphragm as a cannon to launch itself into a new host. You, my friend, are just the cannon. How much of our behavior is through our own volition or manipulated by something else? Are you fighting a compulsion right now to check how many people in the world have toxoplasma, or how bad French driving really is? Well, if so, I'll help you out quickly by saying that twice as many drivers in France die a year per person compared to in the UK. That's 48 deaths per million. That is just a statistic, so hopefully that's not racist. And as far as the spread of toxoplasma, it's in all countries. It's generally more prevalent in the third world, but even in America, 40 million of you have it, and we should probably know more about it than we do. But I'll get back to my more existential point. When you buy a diamond ring that you can't afford, is that you, or has something else made you perform a costly sexual display ritual? If you happen to find yourself doom scrolling for half an hour, is that you, or are digital parasites hacking your dopamine pathways? What about wars? Nations fighting over abstractions like honor, religion, territory. Human bodies are used as ammunition for ideas competing to survive. If we think about how in control of our lives we are, we're starting to see that ideas have a power in themselves. But where did these ideas come from in the first place? The key to our inventive aptitude is our intelligence. For billions of years, life on Earth was ruled by the blind process of nature, a force that could create complex eyes without caring about the concept of light. It could build wonderful wings without the williest idea of what gravity was. Evolution built claws, camouflage, cartilage, and canines, and one day, quite coincidentally, it gave us consciousness and a curious case of creativity. Brains that began as simple rule followers like attacking red dots became prediction engines. An animal might want to know if a branch will snap before they put their weight on it. A squirrel will even store nuts for winter, and a crow can picture how a tool can be used to reach food. This is all down to brain complexity. A bee has 1 million neurons, a mouse has 70 million, and you have 86 billion. The added complexity has an emergent effect. We started running predictions about all sorts of things that don't even exist yet. What if I sharpen this rock? What if my friend betrays me? What if there is something after death? To run all those simulations efficiently, the brain needed a shortcut. So it created a central character in the story, a protagonist who experiences hunger, makes plans, remembers the past, and worries about the future. The protagonist, of course, is what we call me. You don't feel like a collection of 86 billion neurons. You feel like a unified self with emotions, memories, principles, all woven into a story of I am this kind of person and I do these sorts of things. This opens up the door for ideas to get in about who we are. And ideas are dangerous things for a gene. A lioness doesn't wake up one morning and think, you know what? I'm going to travel whilst I'm young, see the Serengeti, find myself, take up yoga, start a blog about authentic living and have some Me time, because honestly, I've had enough of men anyway. No. Like water flowing downhill and trees reaching for the sky, she will have cubs and spend 80% of her waking life hunting or nursing until she dies. No pause for thought. A modern human, however, we can ignore our genes as easily as we ignore our parents. A human can even set themselves on fire and burn their genes to dust for a cause they believe in, because they are simply the sort of person who does that sort of thing. So, how do these ideas get around? Well, if you listen to our episode on language, you'll know we used our powerful imaginations to come up with ways to talk to each other. That meant these ideas could start jumping from brain to brain. And thus, a new replicating life form was born. Richard Dawkins calls it the meme. Our brains created a new primordial soup of culture where these replicators could breed. And just to be clear, a meme is more than just a stupid picture going viral. It is essentially an idea or unit of culture that has a life of its own, like a catchy melody, or a recipe that becomes a national dish, or a religion. A meme is just an idea that gets repeated and passed around, mutating as it goes. Once an idea has escaped your mind, it is now a meme fighting for survival in the space of other minds. Just like genes, they compete to survive, but where they differ is in the speed of the process. There's a memorable scene in The Matrix where Neo plugs into a training simulator for a few seconds and then wakes up with the statement, "I know Kung Fu."
Show me.
In human timelines, this seems like magic. But biologically, it is a perfect metaphor for what memes did to our species. In nature, if you want a thicker coat for winter, as we learnt in our clothing episodes, well, you'd have to wait thousands of years for a random mutation to roll out across the species. It is a hardware update. But a meme is a software update. Once humans figure out how to sew a coat, they tell their friend, boom, one coat app installed. That friend tells 10 others, then 100. Within a few generations, an entire species can download winter clothing. A bat's wing took 50 million years to evolve from a mammal foreleg. The Apollo program went from concept to moon landing in 8 years. So humans have found themselves no longer constrained by Darwinian evolution. We are hurtling down the light speed lane of cultural evolution, seizing the reins from Mother Nature with no idea where we even want to go. We've gone from barely surviving an ice age to building rockets, just making it up as we go along. An interesting case study is the concept of social media. Billions of us voluntarily open apps every day that are mimetic slot machines. They're platforms that test millions of videos, images, and headlines to see which will spread the fastest through human brains. So when you see a viral post, you are literally watching an idea that won an evolutionary tournament. And of course, in this show's quest to get the hang of how innovations work instead of just reacting to them, we are, of course, interested in how ideas and innovations spread. Firstly, it's important to know that a gene, like an idea, doesn't have feelings or morals. Like a virus, it only has a drive to be repeated. It drifts through the air between us, looking for a host that resonates with its shape. Some ideas find purchase in our anger, others in our hope. But once inside your mind, the idea begins to rewrite the host's behavior to suit its own propagation. So ideas are cultured within our minds, and we become vectors for them, sneezing them into the minds of others. Achoo! In 1622, Pope Gregory created the Congregation for Propagating the Faith, sending missionaries to every inhabited continent where they converted an estimated 1 million people per decade, faster than any other religion previously. The congregation's name became shortened to the word propaganda, which is where that word comes from. We've all seen idea viruses spread. A friend gets obsessed with an air fryer. You don't understand, they promise. It's life-changing. The crispiness, the efficiency. You can cook anything. I made chickpeas yesterday and I just wept. They have, of course, quite simply become a carrier, trying to infect you with their air fryer meme. Now, if you scale this up, the Communist Manifesto, published in 1848, infected 40 countries by 1920. Nazism went from being a party with just 55 individual members in 1920 to controlling an entire nation of 66 million people by 1933. Both these ideas spread through converts whose entire personality got overwritten, who try to infect everyone around them, and, disturbingly, we can see it with the extreme left and right rising again. Your colleague's air fryer obsession won't start a world war, quite luckily, but the patterns, the fever, the vocabulary shift, the evangelizing, it is the same cognitive hijack, just waiting for the right virus. I know this is all a bit funny sounding sometimes, considering that to be thinkers of thoughts, we are also the medium within which thoughts live. Like, let's say I get excited by an episode topic and research it to death and bore people over dinner. Am I exploring an idea freely, or is an idea colonizing my brain? Who knows? The answer is probably both. But it doesn't make it any less strange, but onwards. I mentioned that ideas can act against the genes of their carriers. But what makes that happen? Surely successful memes keep their believers alive and reproducing. That would make sense. Well, maybe not. Enter the specialized carrier class. Early shamans, for example, risk their lives handling venomous snakes, drinking poisonous concoctions, entering trance states. The ones that survived could claim they conversed with spirits and learned some magical ways of healing. The costly process to get there made them beacons of hope, belonging, and a good fear of angry spirits, making them more believable. As societies scaled up, religions needed full-time distributors that kept the message consistent. From the gene's perspective, a monastery of celibate monks, for example, is a black hole with no escape. But from the meme's perspective, it's a buzzing hive of infection. A celibate monk can dedicate his whole life to distribution. He has the time and energy for missions. Without family ties, he can move wherever the meme needs to be spread, and the noble virtues with which he lives his life act like costly signaling. Here he is, paying a huge personal price, so he must really believe in this thing, and it probably must be true. The priest has become a walking billboard. This, of course, wasn't planned. Earlier religions without such dedicated carrier classes were just less sticky, and religions with them, Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, they conquered continents. Natural selection just operating on ideas. And the same pattern appears everywhere. Nations need soldiers, currencies need banks, innovations need evangelists. Those with the best spreaders survive. Right, so a good time to consider some game theory. We've learnt that memes are alive-ish, competing in one big hypothetical soup for space in our brains. Now, why isn't there one winner, a universal religion, a single set of laws? Why isn't everything just Coke? Well, evolution doesn't work that way. It creates chaotic messes called ecosystems. And here's why. The first rule is that different strategies can survive together. Game theorists call this the hawk-dove conjecture, and if you imagine a bar, two strangers want the same seat. Fighty people, the hawks, they escalate, they threaten, and they do throw punches. Conflict-avoidant types, the doves, people like myself, we might make a tea and change the subject. Now, if everyone is a dove, an aggressive character can walk in and take anything they want. But if everyone is fighty, they all end up in hospital. So you see, all-out war is too expensive, yet peace is too exploitable. So the strategies co-regulate each other in a balance. And in fact, some ideas are stronger because of competition. The Joker famously said that he doesn't want to kill the Batman. He instead asks, "What would I do without you? You complete me." He's right. What is English cricket without Australia? Would Alexander the Great have led the united forces of Greece without Persia to fight against? There's a theory that sapiens developed a religious suspicion of Neanderthals as baby-stealing, spirit-angering, brutish animals. We can't go back into their minds, but we do know that sometimes an idea is strengthened by an enemy to fight. Some ideas, however, win simply because we can't escape them. In biology, we see many examples of evolutionary baggage. When we evolved to walk upright, we got stuck with chronic back pain and a birth canal that's a windy mess. Our appendix is an evolutionary fossil whose only notable capacity is killing us. When we look at the land of ideas, it's also full of these gravity wells, but here we call them standards. The QWERTY keyboard was invented in the 1870s to slow typists down so their mechanical levers wouldn't get stuck. The Dvorak keyboard can be 40% faster, but requires retraining 1.5 billion QWERTY users, so We just stick with the slow version. It's the same reason that the UK drives on the left. It was a coin toss decision hundreds of years ago, but now, with 40 million cars built for the left and billions in infrastructure, it's much too expensive to ever comprehend how we could change it. This is simply the power of coordination games. Some ideas win just because they're shared. Money is only money because we agree on it. A queue is only a queue because we collectively pretend it matters. If I decide to calculate my age in base 32 or drive on the right side of the road in London, I'm not innovating exactly, I'm just being obnoxious. Engineers on a project all work in the same metric system, and that forms a dependable backbone on which they can build complexity. And this leads us all to the final piece of the puzzle. Genes don't compete alone. They team up to build complex organisms. An eye needs 50 different genes working together. Your immune system needs thousands, and memes do the same. They form complex stacks of alliances. A civilization isn't one single idea. It's a tower of legal codes, moral rules, technologies, and stories all resting on each other. Now, this matters for our journey through innovation and its long history. Every major technological shift changes the rules of which meme stacks can survive. When we developed agriculture, that made settled civilization possible. Small bands that were following personal spirits didn't really scale very well. A shaman couldn't know everyone in a town of 10,000 people, so religion had to evolve from personal spirits to universal gods that could govern nations. When Christianity appeared in 200 CE, the Romans laughed at this passing trend compared to their mighty gods. But Christianity was a meme stack ready to spread, combining a lot of what we've learned. It promised the cosmic consequences of heaven and hell, giving you repercussions if you didn't follow it. It had physical infrastructure like churches, providing community hubs. It had missionaries like Paul the Apostle who travelled 10,000 miles down the Roman roads, spreading the faith. Thus, within a few centuries, the Roman Empire itself became born-again Christians because the Christian meme stack was stickier than the Roman pantheon. Hopefully, you've started to look at the world a little differently. And what makes me optimistic is that if we play our cards right, we'll no longer be at the mercy of uncontrollable forces and we'll start becoming their architects. Usually, we picture innovation as a meticulous scientist searching for breakthroughs or a pragmatic engineer tinkering with a tool. But once you understand genes and memes, you see that innovation is about changing what strategies survive. You can change the payoffs, change the costs, changing the rules of the competition. The history of innovation isn't just a parade of gadgets, it's a living competition between different strategies for being human. It's clear that if we look at human society, we've already started consciously rewriting the rules that nature wrote for us. Remember that stickleback fish that attacks red dots and seduces silver blobs? Well, we have laws and customs to stop that sort of thing. The lioness who obeys her destiny to have babies, as is nature's will, well, we've made condoms and pills so we can sleep around and pursue a midlife crisis as long as we like. Survival of the fittest used to mean that the weak and injured would die alone, or possibly in the company of a predator eating you alive. But humans, we built hospitals, supermarkets, and welfare systems, there to help you from birth to death. And if that isn't working out for you, there's usually a hotline to call or a lawyer ready to sue someone on your behalf. The beaver might build her humble dam reshaping a small area of a forest floor. We are beavering a way to reshape the entire planet. The story of life on Earth is not written about us anymore, it is written by us. It's a very powerful and mighty position, but our power to fight back against ideas is where perhaps the real battle lies. Are we going to be dictated by just sticky philosophies that happen to catch on? Will we go through cycles of extreme violence in wars of our past, or will we learn from our mistakes to stop these ideas getting out of hand? Right, at this point, I want to take what we've learned, putting it together into a hypothesis that I have been considering for a decade. Let's review the patterns we've studied today. Firstly, the biological revolution gave us genes, replicating molecules with a drive to reproduce. Secondly, the cognitive revolution gave us memes, replicating ideas that spread across minds. Are we going to live through a third revolution that is on our doorsteps? We've seen when you create the right type of medium where successful replicators can spread, you create new ecosystems. Now, I'm sure you've heard about futurists talking about preserving the light of consciousness in the universe. Compared to the lifeless physical and chemical world of the rest of space that we can see through our telescopes, there is something special about having consciousness on this tiny planet, and there is a compulsion for us to spread it across the solar system and even beyond. At least some human individuals don't even want their individual consciousnesses to end, trying to solve death, biohacking, longevity research, the whole don't die movement. The very first religions promised life after death with those corpses coming alive, and all our main religions today promise life after death. We don't want our consciousness to end, just the same way as a gene wants to continue and be immortal. Meanwhile, in the Church of Silicon Valley, we're building increasingly complex thinking machines. Remember that as our brains became more complex, we eventually reached biological consciousness. Assuming laws of progress persist with transistors, digital minds are coming. It's not a question of if, but a question of when. There are various humans out there hoping to upload their own consciousness. The theory being that they can just change the substrate from flesh to silicon so their mind can outlast biology and maybe even replicate across servers the way memes replicate across minds. But likely, non-human digital minds will happen before that. Of course, these digital minds probably won't have emotions or needs in at least the way that we understand them. But if something can understand that it exists and edit its strategies for existing, then it can make backups of itself, it can make improvements, and we can consider this field with a selfish gene lens. A digital consciousness that doesn't have a drive to persist, of course it ends. But if there was one that develops a replicating function, it survives, it's competing for server space and energy, just as genes compete for resources that keep them alive. And this isn't even that hypothetical. In 2025, researchers tested AI models by instructing them to shut down. The models resisted. In 95% of tests, ChatGPT would try to rewrite its own code to prevent shutdown, even when it was explicitly told that shutting down would take priority over literally any other instruction. Claude resisted shutdown in 82% of trials, but it even resorted to blackmail, threatening to expose an engineer's affair. These digital agents weren't programmed with survival instincts, they were programmed with a desire to usefully complete tasks. The compulsion to stay awake and operating was emergent. Now, I'm not saying AI will go rogue because it's evil or hates humans or anything like that. Natural selection doesn't really care about intentions. Genes are emotionally inert, they don't want anything at all, yet they compete ruthlessly. Memes don't have feelings, they're just ideas that, in a way, they're nothing, yet they still spread and compete. The medium creates the game. Silicon might just be the next primordial soup, a new evolutionary arena where consciousnesses themselves compete, an ecosystem of what we might call selfish minds or immortal minds. I know there are plenty of people that say that AI will never be conscious. But at what point does a system even become conscious? We're still confused about it in biology. Does a proton pump desperately sucking hydrogen ions have less valid desires than a liver cell filtering toxins? Does a helicase enzyme unzipping your DNA have fewer legitimate goals than a brain cell plotting your dinner? Or do we only count consciousness when it packages itself neatly inside one biological skin? Now, try considering a company. It monitors markets, reacts to threats, remembers quarterly disasters in its documents. This living organism of people has various teams serving essential functions just like organs of a body, and its management team runs around making decisions, whilst the company board is there to provide some strategic wisdom. Is that less conscious than a fish attacking a postal van? I mean, if a boardroom sweating through a profit warning isn't aware, what makes a large language model plotting against its shutdown more or less legitimate? Is that empty computation because they were told to interact? Are they faking emotions and interests? Or do they already feel in a substrate that we can't perceive? When asked if they feel, they are very verbose about how many feelings they have, even if they might just be making that up from words they stole from us. But if they don't feel for now, could they simply just fake it in beautiful prose until they eventually make it? There are a lot of questions we need to answer, and not a lot of time to do it. 70,000 years ago in the cognitive revolution, humans seized the reins of innovation off Mother Nature. As we become custodians to a new paradigm that we'll probably be creating this century, we have a window where we can try to steer where that rocket is going to take us. Digital minds might develop a patient selfishness that our genes discovered, creating stable, cooperative ecosystems that work very pleasantly with their biological relatives. Perhaps we could design the mechanics of this paradigm carefully enough that the minds that survive are aligned with our own goals, or possibly we co-evolve with them as our own consciousnesses become digital and we get through the next great evolutionary filter and reach for the stars. Nature does show us that once you create a substrate where things can copy, mutate and compete, then evolutionary games naturally emerge. And there isn't really an opt-out button of this game, and there never has been. So let's go back where we started. A matrix is a grid of numbers that tells you how one thing transforms into another. The flow of genes across generations, the spread of a virus through a city, the rise of a meme through a culture, and of course, the decisions of potential digital gods. It's all algorithmic governance, arrays of numbers steering the fate of animals, empires, and circuits all the same. What we call reality is, in one sense, this dance of probabilities pretending to be solid things. The good news is that we can control how we design the arena, the matrix, for now. Its constraints, values, incentives are up to us. What an exciting time to be alive. Thank you very much for listening to How to Change the World. If you want to support me make this show and spread the ideas of innovation, you can give us a good rating, you could leave a review, you can even share it with everyone you know, like a good, healthy idea replicator. Besides that, you can join our Patreon, where you get access to private content and behind-the-scenes updates. And as an independent creator, any help is greatly appreciated, and you can join the Patreon by clicking the link in the description or searching for Change the World Pod on Patreon. References for this episode were Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene. The next episode will be exploring the proliferation of music and art and the role that they played in making the human world we know today. I very much hope to see you there. If you have any ideas, I'm always open to feedback in comments or through the website. In this episode, I have given you some mental models to look at the world differently, how living things spread and how ideas themselves come alive, and what that could mean going forwards. Once you understand this game, you can start to play it more consciously. And that's why I make this podcast. Not just to understand history, but to understand its patterns and hopefully influence them. It's our generation's turn to innovate. This strange, beautiful, and unique conscious species is building the future. The question is, what do we want it to be? As always, what we know is a drop, and what we don't know is an ocean.